Hi, my name is Lauren and today I'm going to be summarising some key tips for making a good impression in a virtual meeting. Now, I'm sure we are all more familiar with virtual meetings than we ever wanted to be, but it's still good to keep in mind some basic online etiquette. So today I'm going to be talking about dress, lighting, camera angles, microphones, the mute button, greeting and farewelling people, keeping your camera on, and using non-verbal cues. So if this sounds useful, please keep listening. So starting with a very basic tip, you of course need to make sure that you're dressed appropriately from the waist up. Of course, one of the best things about virtual meetings is knowing that you can wear whatever you want waist down. However, don't take this luxury too far and make sure that whatever is on camera is professional. This doesn't mean that you have to style your hair or wear a lot of makeup, just make sure that you're looking presentable. Tip number 2 is to make sure that you've figured out your lighting before you enter the meeting. Best practice is to make it so that the light is shining onto your face rather than having your back against a window or another light source. If you do have your back against a light source, it'll make it difficult for people to see your facial expressions, and you'll most likely just appear as a dark silhouette. Tip number 3 is to consider your camera angle. If you're using a laptop or a monitor with an inbuilt camera, the camera angle is probably going to be fine if your device is on a desk or another surface in front of you. If you do have to attend a meeting from a mobile phone, just make sure you're not holding the phone at a lower angle, which is not always the most flattering. Best practice is to have it a considerable distance in front of you, roughly in line with the middle of your face. Tip number 4 is to test your microphone. There's nothing worse than going into a meeting and no one can hear what you're saying, even though you've got the mute button off. Most virtual meeting platforms will have some sort of function that enables you to test your microphone before you enter the meeting. But even if you're not operating on a platform that has this, you can do this yourself by checking your microphone is working correctly in your system preferences or settings. Tip number 5 is to consider your background. Thanks to the pandemic, I'm sure we are all a lot more familiar with our co-workers' homes and pets, family members, etc. And whilst there is a really nice element of informality to all of that, if you're wanting to make a good first impression, for example, in an interview, it's of course best to play it safe and aim for a background that is as neutral as possible. So for example, you wouldn't want to have a clothes rack with drying clothes behind you or an unmade bed. It's best to aim for something like a blank wall or cupboards like I've got here, or potentially even a well-arranged bookshelf. Tip number 6 is to make sure you know how to use the mute button. Again, by this stage, I'm sure we've all experienced some sort of mute button mishap. There's the classic case of someone who talks for about 10 seconds and no one for some reason has the heart to tell them that they're on mute, or the other potentially worse situation where someone fails to put themselves on mute and the whole meeting hears something that they probably were not supposed to. So bottom line is make sure you know where the mute button is and how to use it. Tip number 7 is to greet people when you enter a virtual meeting. Unless you've entered late or you're in a really large meeting, it's a really nice thing to acknowledge the other people who are already in the meeting when you join. If you don't feel comfortable taking yourself off mute to say something, you can at least have a smile on your face and perhaps even go for a little wave. Tip number 8 is to keep your camera on unless you've been told otherwise. Although there might be some circumstances in which you do need to turn your camera off, for example, going to get the doorbell or some other sort of domestic emergency, it's otherwise really important to keep your camera on for the duration of the meeting. And this is because having your camera off for extended periods of time can give the impression that you're not super engaged with the meeting and you'd rather be somewhere else. Tip number 9 is to demonstrate your engagement using non-verbal cues. In my opinion, one of the biggest shames about virtual meetings is that you really miss out on the atmosphere of an in-person meeting. And this is because with a virtual meeting, usually there'll only be 1 or perhaps 2 people speaking and everyone else is on mute. It can make things a lot more pleasant for a presenter and everyone else if you occasionally show your interest in what's being said by using non-verbal cues. A really easy way to do this is to nod along occasionally to let people know that you're still engaged. If you're a smiley person, perhaps even having a subtle smile on your face could be a good way to go. There's no need to go overboard with incessant nodding or smiling, but it is important to show that you are engaged throughout the meeting by using some of these cues. And last, but certainly not least, tip number 10 is saying goodbye to people when you leave a meeting. With a virtual meeting, it's very easy to simply hit the leave meeting button and disappear. However, it's important that you say goodbye to people, as it might be construed as a bit rude if you leave without doing so. If a meeting ends and all people are leaving at the same time, it's common practice for most people to take themselves off mute and verbally say goodbye. However, if you don't feel comfortable doing this, or perhaps if you're leaving early, you could give everyone a wave, or otherwise use the chat function to say goodbye. I hope these tips have been useful, and I hope that you feel more comfortable the next time you need to attend a virtual meeting.